Sure. When we debate what actually makes a successful politician, Jimmy Carter's story is one that absolutely demands a closer look. We tend to want to put historical figures into these neat little boxes, right? Like they were a success or they were a failure. But Carter's legacy? It's deeply, deeply complex. Going from total obscurity to the Oval Office and then pivoting to this genuinely unparalleled post-presidency, there's really nothing else like it in modern history.
He started it all with this incredibly lofty promise: a government as competent, as compassionate, as good as the American people. Now, that wasn't just some catchy campaign slogan. It actually established the emotional baseline for a guy stepping into the spotlight when the country was just profoundly disillusioned. Think about it. The American public was reeling from Vietnam, the Watergate scandal. They were desperate for trust. And Carter stepped up and offered them this incredibly optimistic standard.
So that brings us to the big question for today. How exactly did a virtually unknown peanut farmer from the Deep South become what so many historians and just everyday citizens argue is the most impactful former president in history? To wrap our heads around that, we really have to ask how an absolute political outsider navigated these incredible highs, devastating crises, and ultimately, achieved a redemption arc that is just unmatched.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the outsider candidate.
The sheer velocity of Carter's political rise was just staggering. He was grounded in his rural Georgia peanut farm and his Baptist faith, and he jumped from a naval officer to a state senator in what felt like the blink of an eye. By 1970, as the governor of Georgia, he was already grabbing national headlines. Why? Because he relentlessly emphasized government efficiency and, crucially for that time and place, he actively pushed to end racial discrimination in the South.
Teaming up with Minnesota Senator Walter Mondale, this outsider actually managed to pull off a stunning victory over incumbent Gerald Ford, securing 297 electoral votes to Ford's 241. Basically, Carter capitalized on an electorate that was just desperately craving a fresh choice and a real mandate for change.
Moving on to Section 2, wins in domestic struggles.
Carter was literally obsessed with efficiency, and he honestly got a massive amount done on the domestic front. He created the Departments of Education and Energy, agencies that, still heavily shape our lives today. He deregulated trucking and airlines, which completely changed how we travel and ship goods. On top of that, he appointed record numbers of women and minorities to federal positions, and he managed to dramatically expand the national park system, protecting over 103 million acres of Alaskan wilderness. These are monumental, long-lasting achievements.
But Carter's domestic economy was a striking tale of two extremes. On one side, his administration added nearly 8 million jobs and successfully shrank the budget deficit as a percentage of the gross national product. That's huge. But dragging all that progress down was this incredibly heavy anchor: near-record inflation, skyrocketing interest rates, and a looming economic recession that just severely squeezed everyday Americans. So, to combat the severe energy shortage that was driving so much of that economic pain, Carter took a really massive political risk. He rolled out a comprehensive national energy policy that aggressively deregulated domestic petroleum prices, basically trying to force production. It was a very pragmatic move to address a critical shortage, even if it meant navigating some intense political headwinds at home.
Next up, Section 3, a global peacemaker.
Carter's uncompromising championship of human rights literally sent shockwaves across the globe. And it wasn't just empty talk. While Soviet leadership coldly received his stance, it actively inspired dissidents behind the Iron Curtain. Beyond that, he fought a brutal political battle to get the Panama Canal treaties ratified, he established full diplomatic relations with China, and he successfully negotiated the SALT II nuclear limitation treaty with the Soviet Union. He was constantly working to cool global tensions.
But his crowning diplomatic achievement definitely came in 1978 with the Camp David Accords. Through 12 grueling, highly intense days of face-to-face negotiations between Egyptian and Israeli leaders, Carter personally brokered a historic peace agreement. It was an absolute masterclass in diplomacy, a real testament to his sheer determination and patience as a peacemaker.
Which brings us to a tough part. Section 4, the year of crises.
During his final year, global and domestic events just violently collided. The Soviet Union unexpectedly invaded Afghanistan, which completely upended the geopolitical chessboard. Meanwhile, at home, Americans were suffocating under that brutal inflation and rising unemployment we talked about earlier. So the optimism he brought in '76, it was suddenly being crushed by these compounding, harsh realities.
52. That is the staggering number of American hostages held by the revolutionary government of Iran. This agonizing crisis entirely crippled his administration's momentum. It tanked the nation's morale, and it brought this devastating human element to his final chapter in office.
This deep national frustration ultimately culminated in November 1980 with Carter's landslide defeat by Ronald Reagan. And in a twist of just bitter historical irony, those 52 hostages were finally released on the exact day Carter left office. He literally walked out of the White House carrying the weight of a nation's immense disappointment.
But here is where the story shifts. Section 5. The ultimate post-presidency.
Look, if the story ended in 1981, we might view it as a tragedy. But Carter didn't just fade away. He embarked on the ultimate redemption arc. Through the Carter Center in Atlanta, he supervised democratic elections abroad, he fought horrific global diseases, but on a deeply personal grassroots level, he famously built homes with Habitat for Humanity well into his 90s. Basically, a peanut farmer returning to manual labor as a lifelong public servant.
And the world noticed this relentless dedication. In 2002, Carter was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. He became only the third American president in history to receive the honor, joining Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. It was just a massive validation of his tireless, decades-long efforts in peacemaking and humanitarianism.
Carter's lifelong mission of service finally came to a close when James Earl Carter Jr. passed away on December 29, 2024. Right to the very end, he was fulfilling that very first promise we discussed, trying his absolute hardest to be as competent and compassionate as the American people.
So, as we wrap up, we're really left with a profound question to ponder. If critics judge his single term as a failed presidency, does that matter if it ultimately created a perfect public servant? It's a complex question about legacy, duty, and the true measure of a person's life. Think about that as you process everything we've covered today. Thanks for joining me, and keep exploring.